Policy meeting coming up this week. I mean, you have Jokno and even Medalla himself signaling the possibility that they are more or less more keen to a 25 BP hike here. How do you think should the central bank move?
Well, personally, I think this is a sentiment shared by many analysts and market players, is that we need to see some show of force from the BSP. If they are really, I guess, adamant or intent on controlling inflation, there is the argument that the FX pass-through on inflation is relatively low. But given how the peso is performing and seeing how inflation is here, and it's not just cost push anymore. I think it's quite clear that demand side pressures are here. We need to see a little more, a show of force from the BSP that it's serious about fighting inflation. And then it wants to get back, because they've fallen so far behind the curve. I think they have to show some resolve that they're intent on getting at least or catching up with the rest of the curve.
Okay, what do you think now is a worst case scenario here when it comes to inflation here? Up to when do we see prices remaining elevated? Is it even possible to project a peak at this stage?
Very difficult given how we're likely, if we see the currency depreciate further, we'll have to tack on a little more on the peak for this year's inflation. Currently, I have the peak at 6.9% in October. So if we see the peso depreciating to 56, because it doesn't seem like the BSP seems to care about the currency or where it's headed, then we could see that head higher to 7%. So the entire situation we're experiencing right now has shades of 2018. If you remember back then, the peso weakened to 54.33. We've passed that. Interest rates moved up to 8.3% for the 10 years. But back then, the BSP was at 4.75%. Currently, we're at 2.25%. So just to see the disparity in policy response back then and now, I think that's quite telling. So maybe they need to take a page out of the playbook and try to review what they did back then. Because clearly their strategy right now isn't going to cut it.
Wow, 6.9% at least by October. So far, that's your projection of a possible peak here when it comes to the inflation picture. For a better appreciation of our viewers, how is that scenario going to be like at 6.9%?
Well, when we start to see inflation at those levels, this is when we start to see inflation expectations or second round effects kick in further. There is no way that the authorities can hold off on petitions for wage increases, transport fare increases, and firms will just continue to pass along prices to consumers. So we're starting to enter a scenario where it starts to get ugly. And inflationary pressures become more entrenched. So far, we've sort of taken it on the chin. Consumption continues to be quite healthy. And I think this is something that the BSP has to see as well. A 50 basis point rate hike isn't going to kill the economy. So they have to consider, I think, at least showing some resolve to get ahead of the curve.